everyone. Today we have a do not miss episode with a special guest, the guru of happiness, Dr. Laurie Santos. That is coming up on this episode of Stroller Coaster, created by Munchkin, the most loved baby lifestyle brand in the world. I'm Lynn Smith. With me, as always, my co-host, Justin Tyler. Hi, Justin.
Hey, Lynn. How are you? I'm happy. Are you happy?
I'm happy just to talk to Dr. Santos. And before we get to this, I just want to thank our sponsor for this episode, Walmart. You can get your favorite Munchkin products at Walmart. You know, Justin, you hear be happy, and it's kind of this broad term. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, you can't just snap your fingers and suddenly be happy.
It's like, how do we find, especially in parenting, when there's a lot of challenges and the day-to-day can be a grind, how do we find that state of happiness? And also, how do we teach that to our kids, right, Justin? Like, we want our children, above anything else, you are only as happy as your least happy child, right? Like, that's a saying that so resonated with me, because if your child isn't happy, I feel like it's almost impossible as a parent to be happy.
Dr. Laurie Santos, help us.
Yes, she's going to. We're going to find out. She's a very special guest, the ultimate expert in happiness, Dr. Laurie Santos. Her class on happiness at Yale University, listen to this, it was the most popular course in the school's 300-year history. She's also the host of the Happiness Lab podcast, which has 100 million downloads. So now we have a goal, Justin, for Stroller Coaster. Come on, listeners, let's beat that. And today she's going to share her strategies for reducing stress. We all need this, balancing our daily parenting challenges, and so much more. And then we're going to hear from a mom who had happiness right in front of her and didn't even know it. So let's get right to it. We want to just start with this. How do you define happiness? I mentioned it's kind of a broad topic.
Yeah, well, social scientists tend to define happiness as having two parts. So it's kind of being happy in your life and being happy with your life. So being happy in your life is that you have a kind of decent ratio of positive to negative emotions. Doesn't mean you don't have any negative emotions. As I mentioned, we might talk about negative emotions are very important, especially for new parents, right? But you want the ratio to be pretty decent. That's being happy in your life. But there's also being happy with your life, which is the sense that things are going well. You're satisfied with your life. You have a sense of meaning and purpose. And so what researchers think is that if you can boost both of those, kind of being happy in your life and with your life, then you sort of have a sense of happiness.
Okay, how do we boost it? Parenting's hard. It's hard. I have two little boys. I mean, I feel like sometimes the day is just like minute to minute. There's very little time to focus on the parent, me, the mom, the dad. So how do we do this?
Yeah, well, I think this is something that's being recognized. The recent Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, just put out this public health report about how parental stress is like, a national public health crisis, right? And so I think it's important to really focus on parent happiness. I think when we think about the definition of happiness, this idea of being happy in your life and with your life, I think works pretty well for parents. If there's one thing that parenting does, it really does give us a deep sense of meaning and purpose. I think the problem for parents is the in your life part, right? There's dirty diapers, there's stress, there's drop off, there's all these things that kind of come up and make it tricky. But the good news is that there's lots of strategies we can use to kind of feel better. I think a big one is really just accepting that negative emotions are going to come up during parenting, right? There's going to be guilt, there's going to be frustration, and these are normative parts of parenting. I think the problem is that parents really, when they experience those negative emotions, they try to push them away. I'm not feeling frustrated right now. I'm just going to push through and get through drop off. But I think that moment of deep breath, this is frustration, or deep breath, this is a moment of like parent shame or guilt, right? Just that acknowledgement can kind of free you up to figure out how you can deal with that emotion a little bit more productively. But really what the research shows is that we don't need more time to be happier. We just need to kind of reframe the things that we're already doing to kind of experience a little bit more positive emotion.
We don't have any time, so this is good. So you're saying reframe the thought. So if the thought comes in like, oh my gosh, another dirty diaper, it's a blowout. How do we reframe that thought, for example?
Yeah, well, one of the quick strategies is really to engage in a little bit more self-compassion. I think it's not the dirty diaper that's frustrating in and of itself. I think it's what it represents for a parent, right? Oh, I left it an extra 5 minutes. I'm a terrible mom. Like, I'm not doing this well, right? Those are moments for what scientists call self-compassion, right? Where you talk to yourself internally like you would talk to a good friend. If a mom friend or dad friend came up to you and was like, oh, I'm falling apart, I'm not doing it right, you would say, Everybody goes through this. It is fine. It is a common human experience to beat yourself up. You're doing okay. You just use those same internal statements with yourself. Often self-compassion has these three parts. One that we've just talked about, this idea of mindfulness. You need to recognize this is hard. I'm frustrated right now. I'm feeling guilty right now. The second step is this idea of common humanity. And you say, yeah, and all parents throughout the history of time, especially in the modern day, have gone through this. I'm not alone. Third step is self-kindness, right? How can I talk to myself like a friend? Another question is like, what can I take off my plate? What do I need right now? Sometimes those questions can be really telling. And I think kind of get us off the wrong path to happiness. All too often when you think about like self-care, being happy, it's like, oh, a bubble bath or like, some
we don't have time for that.
No, sometimes what you need is like, I actually need to ask my partner for help. Or like, I need like an extra 2 minutes in the bathroom to just cool down, right? I think that question of what do I really need right now, it can be even more telling than the other kind of self-care advice we often see.
I feel like in my household, the feeling of being overwhelmed is a real impediment to happiness.
Yeah, Justin, I'm really glad you brought up overwhelm, because when I think of all the negative emotions that happen during parenting, I feel like overwhelm is a big one, right? And it's one that we really have the tendency to like deny and push through. Like that overwhelm is very inconvenient when it comes up, right? Because it comes up like in the middle of the workday or when dinner's
You're already
not
in a
ready,
bad place, and it's like, well, now I'm overwhelmed.
Exactly. But honestly, overwhelm is one of the most important emotions to kind of mindfully recognize, where you notice like, I'm slamming this laundry around. I'm overwhelmed, right? That's normal. This happens. What do I need, right? And that's going to be really powerful, because the problem with overwhelm is like I think not just overwhelm, but all negative emotions are kind of like the alert signal on your car. When the tire light comes on or the engine light comes on,
Check
it's usually
engine.
inconvenient.
Yes,
you're like,
good.
but if you ignore it too long, worse things are going to happen. Or the whole
goes from
car's
yellow to
gonna break
red,
down.
the worst color.
Exactly, right? And I think our overwhelm can quickly go from yellow to red if we're not taking it seriously and really asking ourselves, what can we do to deal with this?
What's coming up for me, and my kids are a little bit older, but when they were little, like newborn, there's a very real issue that we all face, and postpartum depression is really not talked about enough.
Yeah.
It happens to so many women, and I'd love to get your take on how we can get support when it's hard to think logically, when you're sleep deprived, when maybe you have a colicky baby like I did. How do we apply some of these lessons in those early stages?
Well, I think a big one is really to notice those shameful feelings and to ask for help. I feel like a big reason a lot of women who are experiencing postpartum depression don't get help is they feel terrible about it. They feel embarrassed about it. They're just, especially your first kid, your new mom, you're experiencing this. You're like, I'm doing something wrong. Like, I'm supposed to love my kid all the time, even when he's colicky. And what I think that means is that women are going through these symptoms, too afraid to even bring it up maybe to their close partner, their parents or friends, and then they just don't get the help they need. That's where self-compassion can really come in, where you just have the instinct to talk to yourself and say, I'm going to notice what I'm going through, even if it's a little shameful, even if it kind of has shame in it. And I'm going to say, this is normal. Like, other moms have definitely gone through this, and then all of a sudden it makes it a little bit easier to reach out and get help. And so I think that's one of the big problems with postpartum depression is people try to push through it and struggle through it alone. But actually, talking to your physician, talking to the people you care about, talking to a therapist, those things can really help.
Dr. Santos, you did a national survey. You wanted to find out what are some of the things that parents are struggling with. What did they say? What was the biggest challenge?
Yeah, lots of things. I mean, I think a huge one was time management, right? Which is not going to come as a surprise to any parents, right? They just feel like there's too many demands, too many roles to balance, right?
Sure.
I think a lot of parents, especially with slightly older kids, were sort of thinking about how to manage technology. Even if you've got a toddler, I think there's this worry of like, is sticking them with the iPad a terrible thing, right? I think, and this is a new one for modern parents, right? Is that we've just never had the kind of addictive technologies around our kids, that we have right now. And I think there's a real question of like, how do I balance that sort of thing? A third one that we heard a lot about is negative emotions, especially guilt and shame. There's a lot of parents out there who are feeling like they're not doing it right. They're ashamed. They don't want to admit what's going on. Lots of kind of anger too. This is another negative emotion we heard a lot about. Parents are embarrassed that they feel anger, even though that's, of course, a normative emotion to experience when you're parenting. And then I think a final one was just really trying to navigate like how to reframe social relationships, right? Like, how do I renegotiate navigate a relationship with my partner or seeing my parents or friends, I think the kind of kids cause a little bit of a perturbation to those social relationships. And so finding strategies to navigate those becomes really important.
Dr. Santos, what's really hard as a parent is watching your child struggle. And
sure.
whether
Yeah.
that's a social issue, they're not getting along, or maybe they're being bullied, or they have, something like ADHD and you see them struggling in school. I mean, how do we address that?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing is to remember everything we know about the psychology of failure, which is that it's a really good path to learning, right? So you're a kid, messes up at school, right? If you swoop in and try to fix it, or if you act really anxious about it, that this is something they should be ashamed about, that can actually impede learning. Whereas that moment of failure is going to be a time when your kid learns the strategies for distress tolerance. It doesn't feel good, but then they can kind of work on strategies to get through it, right? If you think about your kids playing a video game, you wouldn't be sad every time they didn't get through a level, because you know that what they're doing is they're learning to do it better. You'd be like, oh my gosh, the boss got you, you're going to be even better next time. I think we need to start seeing our kids' struggles through that lens. And that's not just some Pollyanna-ish thing. It's really what's happening. The world is giving our kids opportunities to learn stuff, whether that's making friends on a playground, with kids who might not immediately resonate with them, or messing up in school, or learning to tie their shoes, but it's frustrating. Those moments of failure are enormous gifts for learning for your kids. The problem is they don't feel good, right? They feel kind of nasty. And I think as parents, what we can do to help our kids through that is to learn to regulate our own emotions when it comes to our kids' failure, right? If you're, for example, looking out at your kid, trying to make friends on the playground, and you're kind of cringing and then you run in and intervene,
don't do that.
right?
Yeah.
Don't forget that,
Yeah.
exactly, don't forget that they're paying attention to your emotions. So if they tell you about a failure and you react with with anxiety and they're going to pick that up. Oftentimes they don't even necessarily know how to react to their own distress. They're kind of following your cues. And so it does mean that accepting our kids' failure means regulating our own emotions. But this idea of deep breaths, recognizing it's hard, we have adult strategies we can use to manage big feelings better than they do. And our kids' failures are often a great opportunity for us to practice that. If we get that right, again, we allow the world to give our kids these learning moments that are going to make them stronger and more adult down the line.
I think we should also acknowledge you have this wildly popular podcast. You have 100 million downloads. Your happiness course was the most successful course in Yale's history. You have over 1 million followers. People want what you are giving them. And you noted, because people or parents in particular are so burnt out, as one reason this is so relevant. Why else do you think you're hitting such a nerve for people, and why they're seeking this so much?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is that, our culture really doesn't set us up well for the kinds of things that promote happiness. What are the things that promote happiness? Social connection, a little bit of free time, giving yourself some grace. It's the opposite in our culture, right? We have a culture of loneliness, individualism, hustle culture, where you push yourself. We are set up to not do it right. And so I think giving people these scientific insights into the fact that these are the strategies that really work, that can really help people. I think really the biggest tip for finding happiness is to try to be present with moments of joy. And I think a big one that you can get, especially if you have little kids, is a sense of wonder. Wonder and awe, these are positive emotions that we don't experience a lot. But when we can kind of step back, take a breath, and see the world through the eyes of our children, through what they're learning so quickly, right, to the fact that they're just experiencing the world, that can not only give us a sense of meaning, but really a sense of awe and wonder that there are kind of bigger things in ourselves. And so I think when all else is failing, deep breath and what's a moment that I can just feel wonderful about something in the world.
Dr. Santos, you have been incredible, as we expected, and what an important message that we all need right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Whoa. I mean, there was so much there. And at the top of the show, you and I were talking about this. This is such a broad topic, be happy. Well, what does that mean? And when she said that you can be happy with your life and in your life, there's a big difference, and so many tangible tips that you can take. Just reframing that thought to oh God, another blowout, to how lucky am I that my child is healthy? That's a simple thing you can do every single day.
Well, that's what I loved about so much of her advice was very much like big picture ideas and then sort of like, why don't you just take a second and say, here was a moment of joy I had today? Because, you need both really. Or maybe one day it's working to think about how your kid smiled at you from the crib. And another day it's like, I need to reassess what I'm doing with my work to make sure that it is bringing me happiness. The real key to happiness is interviewing Dr. Laurie Santos on your podcast. So take that and get it if you can. Yeah.
There's a reason she's so wildly popular. And I hope that you have learned as much as we have. We'll get to our parenting story in just a minute. It's a fantastic one. But first, we had a great conversation with Dr. Santos. I love this idea about creating more happiness, Justin.
And you know what? So does Walmart, our sponsor for today's episode.
At Walmart, you can create a baby registry. And with Walmart Express Delivery, you can shop for top-rated baby food, healthy snacks, your favorite munchkin products, and have them brought right to your door in as little as an hour. Subject to availability, restrictions, and fees apply.
And that way you can get back to what matters, time with your family. Thanks, Walmart.
And now we'll hear a story from Heather Osterman-Davis. She's a mom who got life-changing advice from the most surprising source, her 2-year-old. Here's our correspondent Fleece with the parenting story of the day.
It was summertime, and Heather and her 2-year-old and 4-year-old were headed to the beach.
The kids had never gone to the beach before and had been begging to go. So we packed up the car, we drive to the beach, set up our umbrellas, put on sunscreen, and I'm all ready to go in the water when my daughter decides she has no interest. She's terrified. So after some coaxing, I finally convince her to go into the water with me holding her. And then after a little bit, she starts to love it. We're kicking at the waves, we're splashing water, we're waiting for the next wave to come, and I think this is the best thing ever. And then I see it. There's this incredibly big wave coming towards us. So I brace. I feel my toe at the same time curl under my foot, and I realize if I continue to brace against this wave, I am going to break my toe. But my other option is being knocked over by this wave and letting my daughter fall into the water. So I break my toe.
Heather's broken toe came at a bad time.
So 2 weeks later, we had a trip planned to Cape Cod with my family, my sister's family, her kids. And I'd been looking forward to this for months. The house we rented was about a 15-minute walk from the beach. But because of my toe, the only way I could get there was if somebody drove me and dropped me off.
Despite her injury and relying on family members to drive her everywhere, she was having an okay time. Until the last day.
It's like one of those perfect days where the sky is blue, the temperature is exactly right, and I think we're going to spend the whole day at the beach. But everyone else apparently has a different plan, which is to go play mini golf. Now, I can't play mini golf with my broken toe, and my daughter Nora can't play mini golf because she only learned to walk 6 months ago. But everyone else piles in the car and they take off, but promise me they will be back in time for an afternoon swim.
Heather is alone in the rental house with her 2-year-old daughter, and time is ticking by. She really wants to make the most of her last day.
Becoming increasingly irritated. The beach is so close, but so far. I can't get there on my own. I can't take my daughter there. I'm looking out the window, I'm looking at my watch, and I'm getting more and more irritated at everybody having left me on my own.
Sensing something was wrong, Heather's 2-year-old asks a question.
So my daughter comes over to me and she puts her hand on my leg and she says, "Mommy, why are you so upset?" And I explained to her why I was so upset, that I just wanted to go to the beach. I really wanted to go for one last swim. And she looks at me for a second and then she asks, "But aren't we having fun, you and me?" And I said, "Well, of course we're having fun. But the beach is still in the corner of my mind. I still want to go to the beach." And then she said, "Mommy, you and I are playing and we're together and we're having fun. Isn't that enough? And my mouth practically dropped open because I felt like my 2-year-old had just essentially asked me why I couldn't live in the moment. And she was completely right. I was so focused on getting to the beach, to swim, to what my ideal of this perfect afternoon looked like, that I was missing the moment right in front of me where I had a chance to be alone with my daughter, playing in this beautiful backyard, and I was missing it.
The lesson Heather learned from her daughter is one she'll never forget. It's something she carries with her to this day.
So often as parents, we try to curate these perfect moments of happiness. This one last swim, this ideal afternoon, that we miss the small moments that are right in front of us. So happiness didn't need to be this grand moment at the beach, but it could be playing with a hose in this backyard, just talking with my daughter.
Heather Osterman-Davis, thank you for that important reminder. You have happiness right in front of you. And it's so simple. It doesn't have to be this complicated, am I doing this? Am I doing that? Am I taking the bubble bath? Am I lighting the candles? No, it's so simple. And all it takes is a 2-year-old to remind you just how simple it is.
I feel like, there's this idea that we need to reach outside of our lives to find happiness a lot of the time, when really it's just taking a second and pushing the outside stuff away and looking at what's right in front of us. And if it's your kid telling you like, hey, chill, like maybe that's the best.
You know, we've learned so much about how to create more happiness, and listeners, I hope that you have as well. If you have a topic that you'd like to discuss or you have a question, we want to hear from you. Reach out to us at podcast@munchkin.com. And thanks to Walmart for sponsoring today's episode.
All right, before we get to our much-deserved moment of calm, I want to take a second and remind everyone of our other podcast. It's called Stroller Coaster Storytime. It's great. It features original stories that you can listen to right alongside your kids with improv actors, great sound effects. Our latest that just came out is called The Great Mystery of Who Put the Candy Bars in the Shopping Cart. We are going to solve that mystery. Check it out.
And the potato chips and all the junk food.
The potato chips, the jelly beans, the Twizzlers, it's all there. You can check that out. It's called Stroller Coaster Storytime, and it's right here in the same feed.
And Munchkin invites you to help plant 1 million trees a year. Since 2016, Munchkin has planted over 5 million sproutlings in some of the most impoverished countries through their partnership with Trees for the Future. Together, they're on a mission to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere 1 million saplings at a time.
That's what I call a breath of fresh air.
Well, it is that time again to get away from it all, if only for a moment. We'll take it. Today, let's head to Maine for a stroll along the rocky shores of a clear blue lake. In the distance, you might spot a white-tailed deer and hear the gentle call of a great horned owl. Enjoy.